If NBA history has taught us one rule about small guards, then Becky Hammon said it best, so I'll play the infamous clip here.
If your best player is small, you're not winning. John Stockton, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash, you could go down the list.
While there have been many great small guards in the NBA, some being the smartest players we've seen or the most athletic, they all fall under this rule. Of course, there are two exceptions. We have Steph Curry, the greatest shooter we've ever seen in the NBA by far, but he's also the greatest off-ball player we've ever seen. And then there's Isaiah Thomas, a player with incomparable basketball IQ, so he was one of the smartest players we've ever seen, and was pound for pound one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen in the game. But even when we look into these two players who are considered the exception, they've been categorized based solely by their height. Sure, Curry is a 4-time NBA champion, but he's only been voted as Finals MVP one time. The same pattern exists for Isaiah Thomas, as he was a 2-time champion, but only received the Finals MVP once. Both times they were awarded the MVP after they didn't receive it in their first Finals appearance. They later forced the world to acknowledge them as the most impactful players on their team on the greatest basketball stage, being the NBA Finals. For Curry, this was in the 2022 NBA Finals, and for Isaiah Thomas, this was in the 1990s NBA Final. At that point, you couldn't deny either of them MVP, but it just goes to show you that even the exceptions to the rule aren't given their due credit until they prove the crowd wrong. However, this current iteration of the Knicks team is actively trying to challenge this belief. They're doing so by building a roster that's focused around Jalen Brunson, and it's at the point where they can compete with any of the teams in the Eastern Conference. And before you ask, yes, this also includes the current NBA champions, the Boston Celtics. And Jalen Brunson isn't the best shooter like Curry, but he sure as hell can make shots when they matter. He's not the greatest athlete in the world either, but he knows how to manipulate the defense and get to his spots. He might not have a genius level IQ, but he's on a team that's about grit and grind. I didn't have a good analogy for that one. But despite this, he's been able to put the league on notice, and there's two reasons as to why. The talent that's currently around him, as well as the salaries of those said talents. When you're constructing a team around a small guard, they're going to need all the help that you can provide. Steph, one of the exceptions, was on a team with Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. And when they struggled during 2016, the years afterwards, they added the greatest possible fit in Kevin Durant. Zeke and the Pistons had Joe Dumars, Adrian Dantley, Mark Aguirre, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, and more. And if you don't know much about history, just go back and watch and you'll understand who I'm talking about. They were talented players as well as bullies, but we're going to ignore that point. The Knicks are trying to replicate this level of talent by adding 3-and-D wings. This past NBA playoffs showed us that if you're trying to win, then you'll need support for your stars with 3-and-D wings, or you just need your stars to be 3-and-D wings. The Celtics won with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown leading the charge on a 16-3 postseason run. The Nuggets were knocked out by the Wolves, who were able to shut down Murray with Anthony Edwards, Jalen McDaniels, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Mavericks picked up a wing that was a huge part of their finals run, being PJ Washington, and the 76ers upgraded their wings by signing Paul George. Teams are trying to pick up whatever wings they can, and the Knicks are no different. On December 30th of last year, they traded away RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley for OG Anunoby. While many could argue that Barrett could have become the better player, OG is a better fit next to the Knicks star Jalen Brunson, and the results speak for themselves. In 23 regular season games, the Knicks had OG. They went on a 20-3 run. While the stats weren't overwhelming for OG, he played his role well next to Brunson, and Brunson thrived as a result. In the 21 regular season games that Jalen Brunson was able to play with OG Anunoby, he averaged 32.5 points, 7.5 assists, and 3.7 rebounds on dang near 50-40-90 splits. And even with his co-star Julius Randle undergoing season-ending injuries, Jalen Brunson was able to lead his team to a second seed in the Eastern Conference. Sure, there were many injuries that occurred in the Eastern Conference in general, but you can't knock the Knicks for that, as they were no exception to this. Just as Julius Randle was hitting his stride, he suffered a season-ending injury that was out of their control. OG Anunoby was the Knicks' main trade acquisition during the regular season, but he was heavily injured in the second half of the season. Mitchell Robinson was injured basically most of the season, and despite all this, Brunson was able to elevate the crew and edged out the second seed against teams that were right behind him. In the playoffs, Jalen Brunson stepped up his game even more, as despite a terrible shooting performance in Game 1 and Game 2 against the 76ers, he killed the noise and elevated his game against a team with arguably the best center in the NBA, Joel Embiid. Yes, I know Jokic exists, but there's always that one guy. Brunson was able to lead his team to a 3-2 lead against the Pacers, but injuries basically crept up on the Knicks. OG suffered a hamstring injury, Brunson sustained a right foot injury and then a fractured hand in Game 7. Josh Hart suffered an abdominal strain, and Mitchell Robinson practically didn't even play in the series. The Knicks were basically running on fumes as they lost 4-3 against the Pacers, but if that team was healthy, we probably would have expected the Knicks to reach the conference finals against the Celtics. In terms of roster construction, it doesn't end here for the Knicks, as they traded for Mikal Bridges to further complement Jalen Brunson. We saw what it did when they added OG, so adding Mikal Bridges could only elevate his game further. Again, when we look back to the exceptions of the rules with Stephen Curry and Isaiah Thomas, they had talented players on their rosters to complement them, and the Knicks are just following suit with Brunson, adding great role players, complementary stars, and just making all-around great decisions. In the past decades, that's been pretty rare for the Knicks. Going into next season, Brunson will have a roster that can support him on his quest to win a championship and change NBA history itself. But a roster like this doesn't come without sacrifice, and we're already seeing this monetarily. The players on the Knicks have found a way to keep the team together while earning what they're worth, and it starts with Jalen Brunson. Brunson was initially signed to the Knicks on a 4-year, $104 million contract. While many thought this to be an overpay, Brunson has been able to prove the doubters wrong, as he's led a team to a conference semifinals in each of the years he's been on the Knicks. This is also ignoring the fact that if the team was healthy, he probably would have made the conference finals last year. So he's basically already proven to the Knicks that he deserves the max like many other lead guards, but instead of signing a max contract, he signed for 4 years for around $150 million. This is despite the fact that if he waited to sign his next contract a year later, he would have earned over $110 million more. It's clear looking at this decision that he has his teammates' best interests in mind, and he wants to make sure that his teammates get what they're worth so that they can stick together for a championship run. If we actually look at the contracts, Brunson isn't even the highest paid player on his team. Both OG Anunoby and Julius Randle are above him. His contract also places the Knicks at the edge of the second apron, which provides flexibility if the Knicks believe that they'll need to make another trade in order to bolster up their team. The only thing left for Jalen Brunson to do in order to defeat NBA history is to go out and continue making a name for himself next year. He's proven that he can lead his team in the playoffs and that he is more than worth his current price. He's been able to reach the conference semifinals twice, and he's been impactful in every series he's been in. The next step for him would be to reach the conference finals and make an impact there. While he has been successful, the conference finals is a different game than from any other playoff series. But with a healthy roster and maybe 1 or 2 more moves to bolster the team, I believe that Brunson has what it takes to be successful and lead his team to the NBA Finals.